The formal censure of the human delegation was scheduled for the third rotation of what the Velmarie Administrative Concord called a standard adjudicative cycle, which meant, in terms any species without 4 auxiliary brains could follow, mid-morning on a Tuesday. Presiding assessor, Doran Keth had been preparing the case for 6 days. His office on the administrative level of Velmarie Station overlooked the main concourse through a long window of blastrated glass, and for 6 days the concourse had served as a backdrop to his work, an unending procession of freight haulers, diplomatic couriers, maintenance crews. And off-duty Concord personnel flowing past, while he organized 41 procedural infractions into the kind of airtight narrative arc that had ended the commercial presence of 9 different spacefaring civilizations in his 12-year tenure on the bench. 41 infractions. The number sat on the opening page of his charge sheet like a monument. The Drenari had lost their trade access over 18. The Hathani had been embargoed for 22, and they had argued jurisdiction for 3 straight days before conceding every point. The Alkari Collective had accumulated only 14 before Keth revoked their provisional license, though one of those 14 involved a cargo manifest filed in interpretive dance notation, which the Alkari genuinely believed should count because their treaty with the Concord guaranteed expressive format filing rights. It did not, and Keth had explained why in a ruling that was still cited by junior assessors as a model of procedural clarity. The humans had committed 41 violations in 17 cycles, and the violations were not creative or exotic. They were mundane, formatting errors, timing violations, quarantine irregularities, unauthorized facility usage, the small, repetitive, grinding failures of a delegation that could not be bothered to learn the manual properly. That was how Keth had characterized it in the case summary he filed with the Administrative Review Board 3 days ago, a pattern of systematic noncompliance driven by indifference to Velmarie procedural standards. He had used the word indifference twice and the phrase persistent disregard once. The Review Board had approved the tribunal without comment, which was as close to enthusiasm as the board ever got. Keth was not cruel. He was thorough. The distinction mattered to him, and he maintained it with the same precision he applied to every charge sheet, every ruling, every procedural citation he had ever written. Thoroughness was the foundation of the Concord. Without it, the station, a hub of 700,000 residents, 4 active docking arms, and trade relationships with 31 spacefaring civilizations, would collapse into the kind of administrative chaos that the Velmarie had spent 6 centuries engineering away from. Keth did not enforce rules because he enjoyed enforcement. He enforced them because rules were the scaffolding of civilization, and without scaffolding, things fell. His aide, a junior Velmarie named Tolas, had spent the past 2 days arranging the docket, confirming gallery seating in Chamber 11, verifying that the recording array was calibrated, and preparing the procedural briefing packets that protocol required be available to the respondent delegation upon request. Everything was in order. Everything was always in order when Tolas was involved, which was why Keth had requested the aide specifically when his previous assistant retired. The previous evening, Senior Assessor Venn had stopped by Keth's office to review the docket. Venn was 3 decades his senior, her cranial crests permanently silvered at the tips from age, and from the particular kind of institutional stress that accumulated in someone who had spent 40 years watching the Concord's administrative machinery process civilizations through its intake system. She had a habit of reading charge sheets the way other people read menus slowly, with visible judgment about what had been selected and what had been left off. 41 infractions, she said, turning the data slab sideways to examine his categorization matrix. All procedural. All procedural, Keth confirmed. No safety violations, no fraud, no contraband, no treaty violations. The humans are not criminals, Senior Assessor. They are incompetent administrators. Ven's secondary lids closed briefly, which was neither agreement nor disagreement. It was the facial equivalent of a shrug performed by someone who had shrugged at 40 years of charge sheets and had developed strong opinions about which ones held up under scrutiny. I presided over the Hathani Tribunal, 22 charges. They brought a delegation of 9, including 3 legal representatives and a cultural translator who specialized in temporal perception disputes. The proceedings lasted 4 days. I remember. The humans have been notified that they may bring a delegation of 4. They have. And you believe this will be straightforward. 41 charges, all documented, all generated by the audit system. The pattern is clean and the evidence is automated. I do not anticipate difficulty. Ven set the data slab down on his desk, screen up, and looked at him with the expression she reserved for colleagues she considered technically correct but possibly missing something, an expression that involved her upper crests tilting forward by approximately 2 degrees, and her jaw plates pressing together with just enough pressure to make the cartilage between them creak faintly. The audit system generates flags, Keth. It does not generate context. Be thorough. I am always thorough. Yes, she said, and left without clarifying whether that was a compliment or a concern. The door closed behind her with the standard pneumatic hiss, and Keth returned to his charge sheet without giving the conversation further thought. Ven was cautious by temperament. Caution was appropriate for someone of her seniority and institutional memory. His professional posture was precision, and precision was what this case required. He reviewed the charges one final time that morning, cross-referencing each infraction against the regulatory section it cited, confirming the dates, the filing references, the vessel registration numbers, the classification codes. Everything aligned. The wall of violations was built, and it was solid. He walked to Chamber 11 through the main administrative corridor, which ran the length of the station's upper deck, and offered a view, through panoramic windows on the port side, of docking arm 3 extending into the void like a skeletal finger. He could see 3 vessels queued for departure, their running lights blinking in the standard sequence that meant clearance pending. The departure traffic on Arm 3 had increased noticeably over the past year. Tolles had mentioned it in a staffing report, noting that the throughput gains had reduced docking wait times and freed up 2 berths that were now generating additional revenue for the station's commerce fund. Keth had not inquired about the cause of the improvement. It had not been relevant to any case on his docket. He passed the junction where the administrative corridor crossed the trade office level, and for a moment the air carried a scent he had learned to associate with the human delegation section of the station. Something botanical, warm, slightly aggressive. He had smelled it in the ventilation, reports the environmental monitoring system had flagged it twice as an unidentified atmospheric additive before the quarantine office clarified that it was a brewed beverage prepared in the human delegation's office, and that it was classified as a Class 1 personal consumption organic. The monitoring system had not been updated to recognize the scent, so it continued to flag it periodically. Nobody had filed a request to update the monitoring system's aromatic database, because nobody had known that the aromatic database needed updating until a species arrived that brewed plants in enclosed spaces. He continued to Chamber 11, pushed the scent from his attention, and settled into his bench. "The human attaché has arrived," Tolles said from the doorway as Keth was settling into his bench. Tolles hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely a beat, but Keth had worked with the aide long enough to register the pause the way a musician registers a missed note. Just the one. Keth did not look up from the data slab. They were permitted a delegation of 4. They sent one, a woman. She is sitting in the anteroom reading something on a personal device. She appears to be, I am not certain of the human term, relaxed. Keth allowed himself a slow exhale through his lower vents. The Velmarie had 3 at the base of the skull, 1 between the primary shoulder blades and a slow exhale through all three, was the physiological equivalent of a man pinching the bridge of his nose while simultaneously rolling his eyes. He set the data slab down and folded both sets of hands, primary over secondary, which was the posture the Academy of Administrative Sciences taught for conveying patient authority. Show her in. If they wish to treat a formal tribunal as a casual appointment, we will not delay for the decorum they have chosen to waive. Tolas dipped his crests in acknowledgement and departed. Chamber 11 was built for theater. Tiered seating for 200 observers rose in a crescent behind the assessor's bench, and the respondent's podium sat low and exposed at the center of the floor, angled so every seated Velmarie looked down at whoever stood there. The acoustics had been designed by a firm called Harathven Associates, which specialized in judicial architecture and had built similar chambers for 11 Concord installations across the sector. They amplified the podium and dampened the gallery, ensuring that any stammer, any hesitation, any crack in a respondent's composure carried cleanly to the upper rows, while the gallery's reactions were absorbed by sound-baffling panels embedded in the seat backs. The lighting was calibrated to place the respondent in a warm pool of directional light, while the assessor's bench sat in cool institutional brightness that suggested the weight and permanence of the institution itself, not the individual. The floor was polished synthetic stone that amplified footsteps. The podium rail was set at a height that was comfortable for most galactic species, but required the respondent to stand never sit while addressing the bench. It was elegant engineering in the service of institutional power, and Keth understood its mechanism the way a surgeon understood a scalpel, precisely, completely, and without sentimentality. Every delegation that had ever stood in Chamber 11 had felt it working on them. The Drenari delegation had gripped the podium rail until the metal warmed. The Hathani had shifted their weight constantly, betraying nervousness that the acoustics transmitted upward as a faint, repeating creak. The Alkari had started gesturing. The woman who walked in did not appear to notice any of it. She was mid-height by human standards, wearing what Keth's cultural briefing file identified as business casual attire, dark trousers, a collared shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, flat-soled shoes that made almost no sound on the polished stone. No diplomatic sash, no rank insignia, no legal counsel in tow, no delegation behind her. She carried a battered folio under one arm, paper, actual physical paper bound in a worn cover, and a ceramic cup that smelled aggressively of some botanical stimulant. The quarantine office had flagged in 3 separate reports. She glanced at the tiered gallery, which was filling with junior administrators and off-duty clerks who had heard that a human was being censured and had come to watch, and she gave the room the kind of look a person gives a hotel lobby that has an unexpectedly long check-in line. Then she walked to the podium, set the ceramic cup on the rail, and waited. Keth activated the recording array. 200 small indicator lights around the chamber's perimeter pulsed once and then held steady amber, the standard color for active proceedings. The tribunal was on the record. State your name and function for the record. Marjorie Lind, Trade Attaché, Earth Provisional Commerce Office, Velmarie Station. You are the sole representative of your delegation. I am. This tribunal has the authority to revoke your provisional trade license and impose a docking embargo of up to 40 cycles. You are aware of this. I am. And you have come alone, without legal counsel or cultural translation support. She took a sip from the ceramic cup. I didn't think this would take long. A ripple moved through the gallery. Not laughter. The Velmarie did not laugh in formal chambers, though they had equivalents that manifested as involuntary crest movements and vent adjustments, but a communal flex of cranial crests that signaled something between disbelief, professional curiosity, and appetite. 200 observers adjusting at the same time made a sound like wind moving through dry grass, and Keth felt the fine sensory tendrils along his jaw plates register it. The woman had just insulted the tribunal by implication, casually and without apparent intent, and the gallery was watching to see how the presiding assessor would respond. Keth was very good at responding. He had been responding to respondents for 12 years, and he had developed a technique that relied not on volume or aggression, but on silence, rhythm, and the room's acoustics. He opened the case file on his data slab and let the silence hold for 4 full seconds, long enough for the sound-baffling panels to absorb the gallery's rustling and leave the chamber in a quiet so complete that the faint hum of the recording array became audible. 4 seconds of silence in Chamber 11 felt like a verdict delivered before the trial began. "Infraction 1, he said. Cargo manifest for vessel Earthredge TL-190, filed on cycle 4417. Your cargo weight was reported in a unit designated metric tons. The Concord Standard Cargo Declaration requires Velmary mass units. The conversion was not included. This is a Class 2 formatting violation. We included the conversion formula as an appendix. An appendix is not the form field. The form field doesn't have enough characters to display the conversion. A Velmary mass unit expression for loads over 10,000 requires 14 characters. Your form field truncates at 11. Then the cargo should have been pre-converted before filing. We did pre-convert it. The truncated value was in the form field. The appendix was a courtesy so your inspectors could verify the math instead of trusting a species they had known for 2 days." Keth blinked his secondary lids. The woman's tone was not combative. It was not defensive or indignant or pleading or any of the tonal categories he had cataloged over 12 years of tribunal work. It was the tone of someone explaining the location of a restroom, factual, patient, and faintly puzzled that the question was being asked at all. He made a notation on his data slab. The notation read, "Respondent cites form field character limit as extenuating." He had written similar notations in other cases. The Drenari had cited interface limitations. The Hathani had cited temporal perception incompatibilities, and none of those notations had altered the outcome. An extenuating explanation was not an exemption. The infraction was the infraction. "Infraction 2, he said. Cargo manifest for vessel Earthredge TL-190, supplementary filing on cycle 4419. The manifest listed hull sealant as a non-reactive composite. The Concord's hazardous materials classification system does not contain the category non-reactive composite. The substance was filed without a valid hazmat code. Hull sealant is non-reactive. It is a composite. We described it accurately. The description is not the classification. The Concord requires a 4-digit hazmat code from the Unified Materials Index. We checked the Unified Materials Index before filing. Hull sealant does not appear in it. The index covers 2,400 materials. Our sealant was not among them because no human materials had been indexed at the time of filing. We were the first human delegation to trade on a Velmary station. We requested that the sealant be added to the index. The request was filed on cycle 4419. And it is pending. In the meantime, we described the substance as accurately as possible in plain language, attached a complete molecular composition breakdown as an appendix, and included a reference sheet comparing our sealant's properties to the 3 most similar substances already in the index. Your hazmat inspector reviewed the appendix and told us the molecular breakdown was the most thorough submission he had seen from any provisional licensee. The inspector's assessment of the submission's quality does not constitute a valid classification code. No, but since the substance cannot be classified until it is added to an index that has not been updated to include human materials, we are being cited for failing to provide a code that does not yet exist for a substance that has no category in your system. The infraction requires us to have done something that is not currently possible to do. Keth made another notation. This one was longer. He did not look at the gallery, but he could feel the second row shifting again, and now the third row had joined it. 2 rows of junior administrators adjusting their weight simultaneously produced a collective whisper of fabric against seat padding that the sound-baffling panels partially absorbed, but did not fully eliminate. The acoustics of Chamber 11 were designed to dampen the gallery, but they were designed for standard Velmarie gallery behavior, small individual movements, the quiet physiological responses of a seated bureaucratic audience. They were not designed for an entire section of the gallery repositioning itself, because the direction of its attention was rotating. He moved on. Infraction 3. Cargo manifest for vessel Earthredge TL-195, filed on cycle 4424. Same violation. Weight in metric tons with conversion appendix. By that filing, your cargo inspectors had told us they preferred the appendix format because it was easier to audit than the truncated form field entry. Inspector Dorothy Arm 3 morning shift said the truncated entries were a headache to verify because the rounding artifacts stacked up across a multi-container load. She asked us to keep the appendix. Inspector preference does not override the filing standard. No, but it might suggest the filing standard has a design problem. Keth did not respond to that. He moved forward. Infraction 4. Same violation, cycle 4431. This time no conversion appendix was included. We stopped including the appendix after your senior inspector told us the team had memorized the conversion ratio, so we dropped it to simplify the filing. The regulation requires the conversion to be documented, not memorized. Understood, though you might want to note that your inspectors memorized our measurement system faster than your IT department updated the form field. We filed the extension request on cycle 4418. It has been pending for 17 cycles. A junior administrator in the second row shifted in her seat. Keth registered the movement without looking. Shifting was the first sign of a gallery losing its disciplined neutrality. Infraction 7. Berth departure from docking arm 3, cycle 4438. Your vessel departed 11 minutes before the cleared departure window. We were ready 11 minutes early. The lane was empty. We signaled arm control and they acknowledged. Arm control acknowledgement does not supersede the scheduled window. So we should have sat in an empty departure lane for 11 minutes because the schedule said so. Correct. Marjorie Lind looked at him. It was the look of someone confirming that the person across the counter had, in fact, just said what they said. She took another sip from her cup and said nothing. Infraction 9. Same violation, cycle 4445, departed 7 minutes early. Same situation, lane clear, arm control acknowledged. We submitted a request to your scheduling office asking whether early departures could be pre-approved when the lane was confirmed empty. They said they would look into it. They did not look into it. We also proposed an alternating priority sequence for the lane 4 merge that would reduce departure delays by 9 minutes per vessel, submitted to the arm control supervisor on cycle 4420, filed under operations review. That proposal is not relevant to this infraction. It is relevant to why we keep departing early. We designed a fix for the bottleneck that makes the schedule inefficient. Your arm controllers adopted it informally because it worked, but since it was never formally entered into the system, the schedule still reflects the old timing. Departing according to the improved sequence means departing before the old window opens. We are being cited for following the system your own people adopted. The logic was clean, but the woman had laid out the explanation in a way that made the technically irrelevant feel substantively important, and Keth could feel the gallery absorbing it. He pressed through the next cluster. Infractions 11 through 14. label orientation, birth umbilical disconnect timing, crew manifest date formatting, and supply crate seal material. The labels. Your regulation says labels must face the inspector upon approach. The regulation doesn't define approach direction. Our dock was configured for starboard side approach, so the labels face starboard. Your inspector approached from port. There is no standard approach direction. It varies by dock, and dock assignment is randomized. The umbilical disconnect. 4 seconds between the physical disconnect and the log entry. That is the signal propagation time via the relay on Deck 9. Hardware latency. We measured it. We told your dock engineering team on cycle 4430. They filed a maintenance request to replace the relay. Pending. The date formatting. Your filing portal auto-converts to local notation for display. Every manifest we filed appears correctly on the interface your staff reads. The infraction was flagged by an audit script that reads the raw database. We reported the discrepancy to IT 5 cycles ago. It's on a list. The supply crate seals. Our adhesive is rated for vacuum exposure. Your magnetic clips are not. 3 of your dock workers asked us for a supply of the adhesive after their clips failed during a pressure test on Arm 2. She said all of this at the same speed, in the same flat register. Each answer had the cadence of a receipts ledger recorded, factual next. Keth moved to the next charge. Infraction 16. Your delegation conducted an unscheduled fire suppression test in the trade office suite, cycle 4459. We didn't conduct a test. There was a fire. A heating element on our coffee brewer malfunctioned. We extinguished it manually, and the suppression system triggered from the smoke. We reported it to the fire warden within 10 minutes. He commended us for the speed of our response. The suppression system activation was logged as an unscheduled discharge event. All fire suppression activations are unscheduled. That is the nature of fires. They do not schedule themselves. Someone in the 4th row turned away from the podium briefly. Infraction 18. Unauthorized biological material in the trade office waste stream. Coffee grounds. Classified as Class 1 organic by your own quarantine office. Standard disposal protocol. We confirmed with the quarantine officer before disposing of anything. Same waste stream as the Velmarie mess hall 3 corridors away. Your office is classified as provisional licensee space, which has a separate waste protocol. A protocol that differentiates based on the origin of the waste, not the nature of it. The same coffee grounds disposed of in the mess hall generate no infraction. Disposed of in our office, they generate infraction 18. The substance is identical. The protocol is different because of which door the substance passed through. Infraction 20. Unauthorized signage in a common corridor. We taped a piece of paper to the wall outside our door. An arrow and the words Earth Trade Office. Visitors kept getting lost in the maintenance corridor behind us, which has no turnaround for 40 meters. We applied for permanent signage. 6 to 8 cycle processing time. The paper is a temporary measure, 8 centimeters by 12 centimeters. 14 visitors have used it to find us, including 2 fleet captains with standing sealant orders. By this point, the gallery had settled into a posture Keth recognized from his years on the bench. They were comfortable. They were watching the show. And the show, he realized with the slow, creeping certainty of a man noticing water seeping under a door, was not the one he had intended. He had planned to methodically build a wall of violations so high that the revocation would feel inevitable by the time he reached infraction 41. Instead, the woman's flat calm was reshaping the rhythm of the entire proceeding. Each charge landed, and each explanation absorbed it without ceremony, and the cumulative effect was not of a respondent being buried, but of an assessor stacking feathers on a scale and insisting each one was a boulder. He was aware, with a precision that 12 years on the bench had made reflexive, of what the gallery was doing. They were repositioning. Not physically, the shifting had subsided into a stillness that was itself significant but attitudinally. The 200 observers who had come to watch a censure were watching something else now, and the something else was changing their posture from spectators of punishment to witnesses of a different kind of proceeding. Keth could feel it in the quality of the silence. The silence had weight, and the weight was not on the podium anymore. He skipped ahead to what he believed was the strongest remaining charge. Infraction 23. Health and biological quarantine. Your delegation imported a substance designated coffee into a station food service area without filing a xenobiological impact assessment. We filed one, 17 cycles ago, the day we arrived. Your quarantine office approved it and classified coffee as a Class 1 personal consumption organic. That approval covered personal consumption. The substance was served to a Velmarie clerk in the trade office. That constitutes distribution. She asked to try it. Distribution of an unclassified organic stimulant requires a secondary filing under Section 91 of the Import Regulatory Framework. Coffee is not unclassified. Your quarantine office classified it on day 1. Section 91 covers unclassified organics. Coffee is classified. Your own office classified it. The infraction does not exist under your own code. She was right. Keth had relied on the audit script's flag without cross-referencing the classification record. The script flagged distribution of any organic stimulant to a non-originating species. It did not check whether the substance had already been classified. The script had a gap, and the gap had produced a charge that did not exist under the Concord's own regulatory framework. She liked it, Marjorie added, as a footnote. A stifled sound from the 5th row. The acoustics did not permit it to stay stifled. He pressed forward through the remaining charges. He was accelerating now, not because he was confident, but because each individual exchange was deepening the pattern rather than building the wall, and he wanted to reach the aggregate summation before the pattern became the only thing the gallery could see. Infraction 26. Unauthorized modification of a station communication terminal. Your delegation installed a secondary display unit without filing a facilities modification request. We plugged a portable monitor into the auxiliary output port. The port was empty, unused, and labeled auxiliary, a label which in most contexts means available for supplementary use. The power draw increase was 0.03%, which is within the measurement tolerance of the circuit monitor itself. Your facilities coordinator confirmed this and told us no filing was needed. The audit script flagged it because the script does not account for instrument tolerance. It flags any non-zero change to power draw. Even a change smaller than the instrument can reliably measure. Keth made a notation. He had been making notations throughout the proceeding, and the notations had changed in character as the session progressed. The early ones were brief procedural notes, respondent cites extenuating, conversion appendix referenced. The later ones were longer, more detailed, and increasingly focused not on the respondent's answers, but on the gaps in his own case. He realized, taking notes on his own charges rather than on the respondent's defense. Infraction 31. Unauthorized communication protocol during cargo operations. Our ship-to-shore radio, non-overlapping frequency band. Your communications officer tried to register it when we arrived. The authorized frequency database rejected the input because it only accepts frequencies within the Concord standard range, and ours falls outside it. The officer paper-logged it, initialed the log entry, and filed a help desk ticket requesting that the database be expanded to accommodate non-Concord frequency bands. The ticket was processed, reviewed, and closed. The resolution was out of scope. The frequency has been in continuous, documented, non-interfering use for 17 cycles. Infraction 34. Equipment stored in a common corridor without a temporary storage permit. 3 cases of hull sealant samples against the wall next to our office door. The cases occupy 30 centimeters of width in a corridor that is 12 meters wide. Our office is 4 meters by 3 meters and does not contain interior storage, no closet, no shelving, no designated storage area. We applied for a temporary storage permit. The permit application requires a justification for why interior storage cannot be used. Our justification is that interior storage does not exist in our assigned space. The Space Allocation Office confirmed that no alternative offices are available for provisional licensees. The permit is pending. Infraction 37. Unauthorized data access. You downloaded atmospheric composition data from the station's public meteorological database without filing a data access request. The database is public. The word public appears in its official name. It is accessible from any terminal on the station without a login credential, without a terms of use agreement, without a click-through acknowledgement, and without any indication, visual, textual, or systemic, that provisional licensees are excluded from access. We downloaded atmospheric data because our hull sealant formulation needs to account for the atmospheric conditions at the ports where our customers operate. If you intend to restrict access to provisional licensees, you will need to build a restriction. Currently, there is none. Infraction 39. Unauthorized use of the shared maintenance bay on Deck 14, designated for Concord-registered vessels only. Our shuttles cannot be Concord-registered because provisional licensees are not eligible for vessel registration. That is a policy decision, not a reflection of our shuttle's condition. They pass every safety inspection your dock authority requires, and they have passed every one for 17 cycles. The nearest non-Concord maintenance facility is Station Alkery, which is a 40-hour transit each way. 80 hours round trip for a docking clamp recalibration that takes 4 hours. We used the bay on Deck 14. We cleaned it afterward. The deck supervisor inspected and confirmed it was left in better condition than we found it, because we also replaced a worn gasket on the bay's atmospheric seal that had been flagged in the bay's own maintenance log for 2 cycles without being addressed. We offered to pay a usage fee. There is no usage fee. There is no mechanism for us to pay for using the bay, no posted rate, no invoicing process, and no form for creating one. When the infraction was logged, we asked how we should handle future maintenance. We were told to file for a maintenance exemption. We filed for the exemption. It has been pending for 11 cycles. We have followed up on it 4 times. Each time we were told it was in the queue. She closed her folio. Keth studied the charge sheet on his data slab. He had 41 items. He had now walked through enough of them to recognize the pattern, and the pattern was not the one he had described in his case summary to the review board. The pattern was not indifference. It was the opposite of indifference. Every time the human delegation had encountered a system that did not work as designed, they had asked about it, been told to work around it, built the workaround, and kept going. The 41 infractions were not evidence of a species that could not follow rules. They were evidence of a system that had been generating contradictions for 17 cycles, while a single human woman documented each one on paper. He closed the data slab. I will summarize the remaining infractions in aggregate. 26 instances of formatting noncompliance, 8 instances of procedural timing violations, 4 instances of unclassified material introduction, and 3 instances of unauthorized facility usage. The pattern is consistent and sustained. This tribunal finds that the human delegation has demonstrated a systemic inability to conform to Velmarie administrative standards. The acoustics held the word systemic exactly as they were designed to. The recommended disposition is full revocation of the provisional trade license and a 40-cycle docking embargo, effective immediately. Marjorie Lind set her cup down on the podium rail. May I respond to the aggregate? You may. Thank you. She opened the folio again. Paper. Colored tabs along the edge, blue, green, yellow, spaced evenly. This was not a defense brief. This was something she had built, page by page, over 17 cycles. When we arrived 17 cycles ago, she said, docking Arm 3 had a throughput capacity of 31 vessels per cycle. It currently handles 54. That increase exists because we redesigned the departure sequencing in our second week to eliminate a bottleneck in the Lane 4 merge. Your ARM controllers adopted the new sequence because it worked. It has never been formally filed. The 8 timing violations in your case file are a direct byproduct of the improvement. She turned a page. Every cargo manifest formatting infraction traces to one of 3 root causes: the 11-character form field limit, the portal versus database date format discrepancy, or the undefined approach direction for dock inspections. We flagged all 3 issues within our first 2 cycles on station. I have the original correspondence. I have the replies. I have the follow-up requests, the acknowledgments, the promises to look into it, and the silence that followed the promises. All of it is in this folio. She turned a page. The hull sealant classification. We were cited for filing without a valid hazmat code. The Unified Materials Index does not contain a code for our sealant because no human materials have been added to the index since we arrived. We filed the addition request on cycle 4419. We are item 37 in a queue of 40. The committee that processes additions meets quarterly and has not reached our item in 5 meetings. We attached a full molecular composition breakdown, a comparative reference sheet, and a properties analysis. Your hazmat inspector called it the most thorough submission he had seen. But the code does not exist, so we were cited for not providing it. Another page. The fire suppression. We did not test the system. We had a fire, we put it out, and the system activated automatically. The station fire warden commended our response. We were cited because the activation was logged as an unscheduled discharge event. We also replaced a failing heating element in the break room on Deck 8 because we noticed it had the same wear pattern as the one that caused our fire. Nobody asked us to do this. We had the spare part. Another page. The coffee was classified on day 1. Section 91 does not apply to classified substances. The monitor draws 0.03% more power, which is within the measurement tolerance of the circuit monitor. The change is smaller than the instrument's own margin of error. The communication frequency was acknowledged and paper-logged by your own officer when the database rejected his attempt to register it. The adhesive seal compound is vacuum-rated. Your regulation magnetic clips are not. The corridor storage cases occupy 30 centimeters of a 12-meter hallway. The meteorological database has no access restriction and no indication that one exists. The maintenance bay exemption has been pending for 11 cycles. The corridor signage authorization has been pending for 6 cycles. The waste stream classification is based on which door the coffee grounds pass through, not what the coffee grounds are. She closed the folio and looked first at the gallery, then at Keth. These are the 41 infractions. Every one of them has a corresponding record in your own administrative system, a flag we raised, a workaround we built, a request we filed, a form limitation we documented, a question we asked, and an answer we received. I have copies of all of them. She tapped the folio. Paper copies. I made paper copies because your digital filing system deletes support tickets after 90 days, and I wanted to be able to show someone on a day exactly like this one, what we had been doing for 17 cycles besides accumulating infractions. She set the empty cup down on the rail. We came here to trade. That is all we came to do. We sell composite hull sealant and we buy refined halocite ore. The sealant is good. Your own shipyards use it, not because we marketed it aggressively or undercut your suppliers with loss leader pricing, but because the dock crews who tried it told other dock crews, and the fleet captains whose ships held together in pressure cycling tests told other fleet captains. 3 of your fleet captains now have standing orders with us. The sealant outperforms the Concord certified equivalent by a factor of 2 in adhesion strength and withstands 4 times the thermal cycling range, at 1/3 the cost. We did not set the price to be competitive. That is what it costs us to make. She paused. Not for effect, there was nothing theatrical in it. She paused the way a person paused when they were about to say something they had decided was worth saying carefully. The halocite we buy goes to a medical manufacturing facility on Earth that produces joint replacements for elderly patients. Not weapons, not warships, not strategic materials. Joint replacements for people whose knees have worn out and who would like to keep walking. That is the entire commercial relationship. We sell sealant, we buy ore, we file paperwork, we drink coffee, and every 90 days the system that records what we have been doing erases itself and we start documenting all over again. A Velmarie in the third row made a sound Keth could not classify. It was not the stifled laugh from earlier. It was closer to the sound a Velmarie made when they realized they had walked into a meeting without reading the brief, a low, involuntary contraction of the vent membranes that produced a soft whistle of dawning comprehension. If you revoke our license, the sealant supply to your shipyard stops. Your fleet captains revert to the Concord certified product 3 times the cost, twice the application time. The maintenance bay on Deck 14 goes back to sitting empty on off cycles because we were the only ones using it. The docking throughput on Arm 3 stays at 54 because the sequencing improvement is already embedded in your controller's habits, but nobody will remember who built it, or that it was built by the same delegation you cited for departing early because of it. And the coffee runs out in about 6 days. She put the folio under her arm. I would like to continue selling hull sealant and buying halocite ore. I would like the maintenance exemption that has been pending for 11 cycles to be processed. I would like the filing portal's character limit extended to 14 characters so we can stop building appendices. And I would like someone to file the departure sequence improvement under a Concord efficiency reference number so that when the next provisional licensee arrives and does something useful, there is a precedent for recognizing it instead of prosecuting them for it. She looked at Keth. It was not a challenging look. It was the look of someone who had finished filling out a form and was waiting for the stamp. Keth sat behind the assessor's bench and felt the architecture of Chamber 11 working against him for the first time in 12 years. The tiered seating, the crescent gallery, the amplified podium, the dampened rows, all of it was designed to make the person at the center of the floor feel exposed and small, and all of it was now doing precisely the opposite. The woman at the podium was not diminished by the room. The room was diminished by her. She had stood at the lowest point of the chamber and made it the highest, not by raising her voice or challenging his authority or appealing to sympathy, but by being so thoroughly, boringly, procedurally correct that the architecture itself seemed to lean toward her like a crowd watching someone solve a problem they had all agreed was unsolvable. Tolas was standing by the door with his crests flat, the Velmarie equivalent of holding one's breath. Every pair of secondary lids in the gallery was fully open, which signified complete, undivided attention. Not one face was watching the respondent anymore. They were watching Keth. He deactivated the recording array. The amber indicator lights went dark. The tribunal will recess. For how long? Marjorie asked. For as long as it takes me to read your documentation. Blue tabs are the flags we raised. Green tabs are the workarounds we built. Yellow tabs are pending requests. She walked to Tolas, who took the folio with both primary hands. He opened it immediately. The colored tabs were visible along the edge, neat and evenly spaced, and Keth could see from across the chamber that each tabbed section contained multiple pages of correspondence, filed forms, and annotated regulatory excerpts. It was not a defense brief. It was a record, the kind of record that made a prosecution file look like a rough draft. One more thing, Marjorie said at the door. The clerk who tried the coffee, her name is Zenith. She stops by our office every morning now. She brings pastries from the commissary and we give her a cup. If the distribution question comes up again, I want to note for the record that the exchange is mutual and has been for 11 cycles. She left. The pneumatic door hissed shut, and the chamber's acoustics, designed to amplify the podium, amplified the hiss into something that sounded like a long exhale from the room itself. Keth sat behind his bench for several seconds after the door closed, his primary hands flat on the surface, his secondary hands folded in his lap. The chamber was still configured for proceedings, recording array powered down, but standby lights visible, gallery lighting at observation levels, the podium spot still illuminating the empty space where the woman had stood. The moisture ring from the ceramic cup was already drying on the podium rail. In 20 minutes it would be gone entirely, and the only evidence that anyone had stood there would be in the recording archive, and in the memories of 200 Velmari who had come to watch a censure and had witnessed something else instead. He realized he was doing something he had not done in 12 years of tribunal work. He was reconsidering the case. Not reviewing was mechanical, a process of checking citations. Reconsidering meant asking whether the charges he had filed reflected the reality they were supposed to describe. The assumption that they did had never been tested. Today it had been tested, and the results were in a battered paper folio on his aide's lap. The gallery filed out in near silence, crests low and vents closed. Several glanced back at the empty podium. There was only the faint ring of moisture where the ceramic cup had sat on the rail. Tolas brought the folio to the bench. It was heavier than it looked. Keth opened the first blue tab. A message from Marjorie Lynn to the Trade Office Intake Coordinator, dated 2 days after the delegation's arrival, politely noting that the cargo manifest form field could not accommodate the required character length and requesting either a field extension or guidance on an alternative. The coordinator's reply: use the existing field. Truncate if necessary. Second tab. A message to the Arm Control Supervisor proposing the alternating priority sequence. The supervisor's reply: noted. Forward to Operations Review. Marjorie's handwritten annotation: no record of Ops Review receiving this. Arm controllers adopted it informally after I walked them through it during a lunch break, cycle 4423. Third tab. Quarantine office confirmation that coffee could be offered to station personnel. No restrictions for classified Class 1 organics. Enjoy. Marjorie's note: saved this one. The audit script will flag it eventually. She had known. 17 cycles ago, she had known the system would eventually generate a charge for something the system itself had approved. She had saved the evidence on paper because the digital system deleted itself every 90 days. Fourth tab. The IT help desk ticket for the form field extension. Filed cycle 4418. Status: in queue. Marjorie's note: still in queue. I check monthly. Fifth tab. The communications officer's paper log. Human frequency 741 GHz outside Concord range, logged manually. The help desk ticket for database expansion. Closed, out of scope. Sixth. The dock engineering team's relay confirmation. 4-second delay confirmed. Replacement requested. Pending. Seventh. The facilities coordinator's email. Power draw with intolerance. No filing needed. Each tab was the same pattern. A reasonable question asked through proper channels, a reasonable answer given by a Concord official, and an audit system that flagged the resulting behavior without reading the answer that had authorized it. The system that generated infractions and the system that generated approvals did not communicate with each other. They existed in the same institution, served the same administration, and operated on the same station, but they had never been connected, and nobody had noticed until a species showed up that documented everything on paper because the digital system ate its own records every 90 days. By the 12th tab, Tolas had pulled a chair beside the bench and was reading over Keth's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The folio did not require commentary. It was the most quietly devastating document either of them had ever encountered, and its devastation was entirely procedural. There was no accusation in it. There was no rhetoric, no emotional appeal, no strategic framing. There was just a species that had arrived at a station, asked how things worked, been told, done exactly what they were told, documented every interaction, and then been prosecuted for the gaps between what the system said and what the system did. Tab 14. The Hazmat Classification Request for Hull Sealant, filed on Cycle 4419. Status: pending review by the Unified Materials Index Committee. Marjorie's note: the committee meets quarterly. The sealant has been pending for 5 quarterly meetings. I attend virtually when the agenda is published. The sealant has not appeared on any agenda. We are item 37 in a queue of 40. Tab 17. 3 handwritten notes from dock workers on station notepaper requesting more adhesive. One was signed by Vethais. A dock foreman Keth recognized a 20-year veteran who did not ask favors lightly or from species he did not respect. Tab 22. A maintenance bay sign-off on a paper form discontinued 8 years ago because the digital version required a vessel registration number that unregistered vessels could not generate. Bay left clean. Gasket replaced by the human team. Unscheduled, no charge. The deck supervisor's note: the digital forms don't work for half the things that actually happen down here. The remaining tabs continued the pattern. Reasonableness met with silence. Workaround met with citation. Documentation met with deletion. Tab 38. Something Keth had not expected. A handwritten list titled, Improvements Adopted Informally by Station Personnel, Not Filed. 7 items. The departure sequence fix. The adhesive compound now used by 3 dock crews. A filing shortcut for multi-container loads that Inspector Dorith had adopted from the human appendix format. A corridor lighting adjustment on Deck 7. A break schedule rotation for the Arm 3 controllers that Marjorie had proposed after noticing them working double shifts during peak cargo cycles. A ventilation rerouting suggestion for the maintenance corridor that reduced the ambient temperature by 4 degrees and made the corridor usable during off-peak hours. The heating element replacement on Deck 8. 7 improvements, none filed, none credited. All adopted because they worked, all invisible to the administrative record, all the kind of quiet, unremarkable, functional contributions that a system designed to track infractions would never notice because the system was not designed to track contributions. Keth closed the folio after the last tab. 3 hours. His lower vents were closed. His crests had been flat so long that Tolas had placed a glass of mineral tonic on the bench, what an aide did when their superior was experiencing what the cultural literature called an involuntary reassessment of institutional assumptions. Assessor, Tolas said. He was still holding the folio open to the last page. His crests were doing something Keth had never seen them do. They were oscillating between flat and raised, which was the physiological expression of a Velmarie whose professional judgment was telling them one thing and whose institutional training was telling them another. How many of the 41 survive? You have already done the count, Tolas. You did it while I was reading. Possibly 3, the 3 maintenance bay usages, but only because the exemption has not been processed, and the processing delay is entirely on our end. The human delegation filed the exemption request. We did not process it. If the exemption had been processed at any point in the past 11 cycles, even last week, even yesterday, those 3 infractions would not exist. 3 out of 41. 3 out of 41, and all 3 are our fault. Keth looked at the folio. It sat on his bench like an object from another civilization, which it was. It was heavy with 17 cycles of a kind of patience he had not encountered before in 12 years of censure tribunals, not passive patience, not the patience of waiting for something to change, but the active, methodical, unglamorous patience of documenting things while simultaneously fixing them, one workaround at a time, one politely ignored improvement at a time, one form filed for a system that would delete the form before anyone read it. The woman who had built this folio had understood something that Keth was only now beginning to understand. The system she was operating inside had not been built to accommodate her, and she had decided to accommodate it instead, carefully, thoroughly, and without complaint. And the system had repaid her patience by prosecuting her for it. The woman had not come to a tribunal, she had come to an audit, and she had audited the auditor. He drafted the ruling, 11 pages instead of 4 sentences. It cited 14 regulatory sections. It cross-referenced 9 filed requests. It reproduced the communications officer's paper log and the help desk ticket closed as out of scope. It recommended a comprehensive review of the provisional licensee filing system. And it recommended converting the provisional trade license to a full commerce authorization, bypassing the 24-cycle probationary period. The Standards Office will not be pleased, Tolas said. The Standards Office has not processed a maintenance exemption in 11 cycles. A full authorization has never been granted before probation expired. The probation exists to measure administrative competence. This delegation exceeded the measurement standard before I opened the case file. And the coffee, Zenith. Keth flipped to the last yellow tab. Marjorie's handwriting, pending, cultural exchange protocol, informal Zenith trade office, ongoing. Beneath it, a sheet recording 11 cycles of morning exchanges, dates, pastry types, coffee preparations. Zenith prefers less sugar after 5th-day rotations. Extra cup for Zenith's colleague Drell, who asked. Zenith brought dried kelp fruit pastry, excellent. File it under cultural liaison activity, retroactive to cycle 1. He sealed the ruling and transmitted it. Within 2 hours, Senior Assessor Ven appeared in his doorway. Her crests were fully raised. She was holding a data slab displaying his ruling. 11 pages, she said. The case required it. Your planned ruling was 4 sentences. You rehearsed the summation yesterday. Your door was not fully shut. She looked at the folio on his bench. May I read it? He handed it to her. She read it in an hour and a half, her jaw plates clenching by the 7th tab, her lower vents closing by the 12th. The audit system generated every one of these infractions, she said when she finished. Yes. And did not cross-reference its own institution's correspondence for any of them. No. We have used the audit system's output as case evidence for 9 censure tribunals over the past 4 years. The implications settled into the room. 9 censure tribunals, all built on audit-generated evidence. If 41 charges collapsed to 3 upon review, how many charges in the Drenari case, the Hathani case, would survive the same scrutiny? The Drenari case, Ven said, 18 charges. How many would survive if they had brought a paper folio instead of 3 lawyers? Keth did not answer. Your ruling is correct, Ven said. I will endorse it. I will also recommend that the review board commission an independent assessment of the audit system, beginning with a retrospective review of the last 20 cases. She paused at the door. The coffee, she said. The clerk Zenith. You noted it as a cultural liaison activity in the ruling. Retroactive to cycle 1. I would like a cup myself, if the distribution protocol permits it. Keth looked at her. Her crests were raised in an expression he had never seen from Senior Assessor Ven curiosity, not the institutional kind that generated inquiry notices and committee reviews, but the personal kind. "I will ask Tolas to inquire," he said. The license converted. The 41 infractions were reclassified as system compatibility observations, a designation the records office had to create a new filing category to accommodate. Within 2 cycles, the IT office extended the cargo manifest form field limit. 7 other species conversions had been quietly breaking against the same wall for years. Nobody had noticed because nobody had complained. Nobody had complained because nobody had kept paper records. The departure sequence improvement was filed under a Concord efficiency reference number, the first issued for a provisional licensee. Operations Review discovered the original proposal had been forwarded to them 6 cycles ago and never arrived. A data entry error. The departure sequence, already in use for 6 cycles, was formally adopted. The next morning, Keth walked past the trade office corridor on his way to Chamber 11. His usual route was faster. He told himself the detour was because the upper-level lifts were being serviced, which was true but not the reason. Through the open door of the human office, barely larger than a supply closet, he could see Marjorie Lind at her desk, covered in paper. A small device produced coffee. A stack of cargo manifests sat beside a framed photograph of a building he did not recognize. She was making notations on a printed form with a hand-held writing instrument. Across from her, holding a ceramic cup in both primary hands with the careful grip of someone handling an unfamiliar object they had decided to enjoy, was Zenith from the trade office. A plate of commissary pastries sat between them. Zenith's cranial crests were raised in the pattern of genuine contentment, not the institutional kind, but the unstructured kind that came from choosing someone's company. Neither looked up. Keth stood in the corridor for a moment. It was not diplomacy. It was not commerce. It was not cultural exchange in any formal sense. It was 2 people from different species in a room that was too small, sharing food and drink that had once been the subject of an administrative infraction, in a silence that was full the kind that happened when people had been doing this long enough that conversation was optional, and the company was not. He continued to his chamber. At his bench he found a blue ceramic cup next to his data slab, full, hot. Steam rising in a slow curl. Beside the cup a small paper note. For the record, no filing required. Beneath the note a second slip of paper, a completed form, the Concord's informal cultural exchange registration, filled out in Marjorie's handwriting. 1 cup of brewed earth botanical for the presiding assessor of Chamber 11. Classification, courtesy, recurring if acceptable. Filed under Section 12 of the Cultural Liaison Framework. Signed by the Quarantine Office. Approved that morning. Stamped, dated, and cross-referenced with the original Class 1 classification from 17 cycles ago. She had filed the form before she left the cup. She had filed it because the form existed, and because she was the kind of person who filed forms that existed, even for a cup of coffee, even for the assessor who had tried to revoke her license, even when the note said no filing was required. At the bottom, in the space marked Additional Notes Optional, a single line. A second cup can be prepared for Senior Assessor Vin upon request. Same classification applies. She had anticipated the next question before it was asked. She had documented the answer before the question existed. She had filed the paperwork for a cup of coffee that no one had ordered yet, because that was what she did. That was what humans did. They showed up, they read the manual, they found the gaps, they built the fixes, they documented everything, and then they offered coffee to the people who had tried to throw them out. Keth set the form down and picked up the cup. The coffee was hot. It smelled like something foreign and slightly aggressive, the way all human things seemed at first: botanical, unsubtle, persistent. It did not fit into any form field, any regulatory category, any administrative framework the Concord had devised in 6 centuries of institutional engineering. It was, however, very clearly the sort of thing that worked.